"Can I continue?" That's what the millionaire whispered on their wedding night. And in that moment, the young woman discovered what it means to be truly loved. She was pure, innocent, but he treated her like something precious. Where are you watching this story from? Subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because what happened after that night changed everything. Golden morning light streamed through the massive windows of the presidential suite at the plaza, drawing geometric patterns across the antique hardwood floors. Marlowe stood motionless before the Baroque mirror, her trembling hands gripping the edge of the white marble console veined with gold. The reflection staring back was that of a stranger, a woman dressed in an ivory Vera Wang wedding gown, Baroque pearls adorning her delicate neck, chestnut hair swept into a sophisticated updo that had required 3 hours of meticulous work. But her eyes. Her hazel eyes remained exactly the same as those of the girl who, 6 months earlier, had been selling her small canvases at a charity art show in Portland, Oregon, fingers stained with cobalt blue and burnt sienna, wearing a floral dress purchased at a thrift store. The scent of wildflowers from her Montana hometown had embedded itself in her olfactory memory, as tenacious as a prayer. Now the air around her smelled of Chanel No. 5 white roses imported from Ecuador, and the vintage champagne waiting in the adjacent salon. The contrast nearly suffocated her. "Miss Hartley, Mrs. Ashford," the polite voice of the wedding planner echoed behind the carved door. "It's time." Marlowe closed her eyes, breathing deeply. In a few hours she would no longer be simply Marlowe Hartley from Whitefish, Montana. She would become the wife of Dashiell Ashford, the man whose name made boardrooms tremble, whose fortune could buy entire blocks of Manhattan. But it wasn't his wealth that had made her heart race that first time. It was the loneliness she'd perceived in his amber eyes, that vulnerability hidden beneath the Italian suits and Swiss watches that cost more than 3 years of her combined salary. She opened her eyes, meeting her own gaze again. "Who are you?" she whispered to her reflection. The answer didn't come. Outside in the reception hall at the Metropolitan Club, decorated with thousands of white orchids, 300 guests waited to witness the improbable union between two worlds that everything should have kept apart. The ceremony was a symphony of glacial elegance. Marlowe walked down the central aisle, her arm trembling slightly on her uncle's, her father being too ill to leave Montana. The stares landed on her like silent judgments, evaluating every detail of her gait, searching for the flaw that would confirm what they all already thought. Dashiell waited at the end of the aisle, imposing in his Brioni black suit. When their gazes met, she saw something she'd never noticed before, a fear that mirrored her own. He too was afraid of falling short, of not deserving this moment of grace she represented in his calculated, controlled life. "You're breathtaking," he murmured when she reached him, his voice husky with emotion. The minister's words flowed around them like a river whose current they barely perceived. Marlowe repeated the traditional vows, but in her head other promises echoed. Those she made to herself not to lose her essence in this metamorphosis, to remain faithful to the girl who painted street musicians on village squares. The kiss sealed their union before polite applause. But it was in the gaze of Dashiell's sister, Theodora, seated in the front row, that Marlowe glimpsed the first battle she would have to fight. This elegant woman with silver hair, dressed in a navy Chanel suit, wasn't smiling. Her lips formed a thin line of barely concealed disapproval. The reception was a whirlwind of unknown faces, extended hands, kisses on cheeks accompanied by comments meant to be compliments, but resonated like subtle barbs. "What a refreshing surprise," said a woman with ostentatious diamonds. "Dashiell has always had eclectic taste." "You must be so impressed by all of this," added another, gesturing circularly at the hall adorned with baccarat chandeliers. "So different from your background." Marlowe smiled, nodded, but each word embedded like a thorn. Dashiell remained at her side, his hand constantly finding hers, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture of silent protection. It was Piper, Dashiell's 15-year-old niece, who finally broke the tension. She approached Marlowe with a big smile, her hair dyed violet, clashing violently with her powder-pink dress imposed by her mother. "Finally, someone normal in this family," she declared loud enough for several guests to turn around. "You know you're the only person here who doesn't smell like perfume that costs more than my tuition?" Marlowe laughed, an authentic laugh that resonated in the hall like a discordant note in a too-perfect symphony. Dashiell smiled, too, and for an instant they were no longer the heir and the provincial, but simply a man and woman who had chosen to believe in something greater than social conventions. But when the moment came for the first toast, Theodora rose, crystal in hand, and spoke words wrapped in the silk of politeness, but dipped in the venom of condescension. "To my brother Dashiell, who has always known how to surprise," she began, her smile not touching her steel-grey eyes, "and to his charming wife, who is learning so quickly the subtleties of our world. May you both find what you seek in this union." The message was clear to all who knew how to listen between the lines. Marlowe was not welcome. She was a temporary guest in a world that wasn't hers. 3 days later, Dashiell drove Marlowe to the Ashford estate in the Hamptons for the first time as his wife. The property appeared around a bend in an avenue lined with century-old oaks, an 18th-century structure in honey-coloured stone, with turrets that seemed to touch the grey November sky. It's immense," Marlowe murmured, her throat tight. Dashiell stopped the car in front of the main entrance where the staff waited in a line to welcome the new mistress of the house. He turned to her, taking her face between his calloused hands. Those hands that had once built furniture before building an empire, a detail he'd shared with her during their third date. "It's large," he acknowledged softly. "But they're just walls, Marlowe. Stones arranged by men long dead. What I'd like you to do is transform these cold walls into a home, into something alive, something that resembles us." The interior was even more impressive, ceilings adorned with frescoes, marble floors reflecting the light of antique chandeliers, period furniture that belonged in a museum. Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper for 30 years, toured the property with Marlowe, meticulously explaining the routines, expectations, protocols. "Mr. Ashford takes his breakfast at 7 o'clock sharp in the breakfast room, never in the kitchen," she enumerated in a monotone voice. "Wednesday evenings there's always a formal dinner with associates. The Italian linen tablecloth must be used, never the Egyptian cotton. The roses from the garden must be cut on Tuesdays and Fridays. The—" "Mrs. Patterson," Marlowe gently interrupted, "what if I wanted to have breakfast in the kitchen?" The housekeeper blinked, taken aback. "Madam, the kitchen is for the staff, but it's also the warmest room in the house," Marlowe responded with a small smile, "where you can smell freshly brewed coffee and bread coming out of the oven. Why should I deprive myself of that?" An uncomfortable silence settled. Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I suppose Madam may do as she wishes." But it was on the 3rd floor that Marlowe discovered what would become her sanctuary. Dashiell opened double doors, revealing a space flooded with natural light. Skylights installed in the ceiling, walls painted in immaculate white, and everywhere artists' materials. Professional quality easels, paint tubes organized by shade, canvases of all sizes, Kolinsky sable brushes, walnut wood palettes. "My God," Marlowe whispered, tears immediately rising to her eyes. "Dashiell, you told me once that Montana light was what you missed most in your paintings when you had to work indoors," he said, his voice tinged with emotion. "I can't bring you Montana, but I can offer you the light. This one faces south, exactly as you prefer." Marlowe turned to him, her cheeks wet with tears, and for the first time since the wedding, she felt something that resembled hope. Maybe she could find her place here. Maybe these walls could become hers without her having to abandon who she was. She kissed him with an intensity that surprised them both, pouring into that kiss all the gratitude, love, and fear she carried. When they separated, Dashiell was smiling that rare smile that transformed his stern face into something young and vulnerable. "Come," he said, taking her hand. "There's one last thing I want to show you." He led her to the 2nd-floor library, a circular room lined with antique books whose smell of leather and aged paper created a cathedral-like atmosphere of knowledge. He headed to a specific drawer of a mahogany desk, opened it, and pulled out a dark wooden box. "There are things I've never told you," he began, his voice suddenly graver. "Parts of my past I've buried so deeply that I'd almost succeeded in forgetting they existed." He opened the box, revealing letters yellowed with time, the elegant handwriting faded but still legible. Marlowe took one at random, beginning to read, and discovered words of passionate love written by a young Dashiell to someone who had never responded. "I was 22, he explained, his gaze lost in a distant past. "I loved a girl from my social class who dreamed of art and poetry. I wrote to her every day while working as an apprentice carpenter. She never answered a single letter. Years later, I learned she'd married a wealthy man and was living exactly the life she desired." He took a deep breath. "That experience transformed me. I decided I would never again be on the wrong side of the financial equation. I built this empire stone by stone, contract by contract, sacrificing everything that could resemble a normal life. And now, Marlowe murmured. "Now I wonder if everything I built wasn't just a gilded cage," he admitted. "Until I met you. You remind me of that boy who wrote poetry and still believed love was worth every risk." Marlowe closed the letter, carefully replacing it in the box. "We all carry scars from our first loves," she said gently. "But maybe those scars prepare us for true love when it finally arrives." That night in their bedroom with silk sheets and walls adorned with antique tapestries, they found each other not as the millionaire and the provincial, but as two wounded souls who had found refuge in one another. The following Wednesday arrived too soon. Marlowe spent the entire afternoon preparing for that first formal dinner with Dashiell's associates. Her hands trembling so badly, she had to redo her makeup 3 times. She'd chosen a simple but elegant dress, black Dior that, according to the stylist hired by Dashiell, was perfect for the occasion. The guests arrived at 8 o'clock precisely. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, a couple in their 60s, whose fortune came from the pharmaceutical industry. Mr. Whitmore, a bachelor investor known for his modern art collection, and Mrs. Blackwell, widow of a real estate magnate who now controlled an empire alone. Dinner began in the dining room adorned with silver candelabras and Lenox porcelain. Marlowe tried to follow conversations that jumped from the Dow Jones to the latest art acquisitions, from new tax regulations to political scandals she'd never heard of. "And you, my dear, Mrs. Blackwell addressed her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What kept you occupied before you met Dashiell?" "I painted," Marlowe answered, her voice smaller than she would have liked. "Mainly scenes from my native region in Montana. I had several commissions from—" "How charming," Mrs. Blackwell interrupted. "Such a relaxing hobby. My own granddaughter takes watercolor classes on Wednesday afternoons." The word hobby resonated like a slap. It wasn't a hobby. It was her soul poured onto canvas, her identity, her reason for being. But before she could respond, the server arrived with the main course, duck à l'orange, prepared by Dashiell's personal chef. That's when everything began to unravel. Marlowe looked at the arsenal of silverware arranged on each side of her plate and realized with horror that she didn't know which to use. She saw Mrs. Sterling pick up a specific fork and tried to imitate her, but too late. She'd already grabbed the wrong one. Mr. Whitmore noticed. A small smile formed on his thin lips. "You know," he said in a falsely casual tone, "there's a precise order for these things. It's one of the first lessons we learn, isn't it?" Marlowe's face flamed. She tried to correct discreetly, but in her nervousness, her elbow bumped her glass of Cabernet. The dark red liquid spilled like blood across the immaculate white linen tablecloth, creating a stain that seemed to expand infinitely. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she stammered, rising abruptly to try to blot the wine with her napkin, only making the situation worse. An awkward silence settled. The servers arrived quickly to manage the disaster, their faces professionally neutral, but their eyes speaking volumes. Dashiell reached for her hand under the table, but Marlowe was beyond comfort. Humiliation burned in her throat like acid. "These things happen," Mr. Sterling said with false compassion that was worse than silence. Marlowe tried to pull herself together, to finish the meal, but every bite was difficult to swallow. When the moment came for coffee and digestives in the drawing room, she attempted one last time to participate in the conversation. "You know," she began with a forced smile, addressing Mrs. Blackwell, "in my hometown we say that—" She stopped short, realizing everyone was watching her with an expression that was polite, but clearly disconnected. Her Montana accent, which she'd tried to moderate all evening, came out in every syllable. The anecdote she was about to tell, a warm story about the harvest and her community's generosity, suddenly sounded completely out of place in this drawing room where every object cost more than her family's annual income. "Excuse me," she finally murmured, rising with as little grace as she'd arrived. "I need some air." She rushed out, her heels clicking on the marble, pulling up her dress to avoid tripping. Behind her, she heard the polite murmurs resume, probably discussing her disastrous performance as soon as the door closed. Marlowe found herself on the terrace, the cool November air biting her bare skin. She removed her Louboutin shoes that had been hurting her feet since the evening began and walked barefoot on the cold stone until she reached a century-old potted orange tree in a corner of the garden. There, hidden from view, she sat on the ground, bringing her knees to her chest and cried. Cried for the girl she'd been, for the one she was trying to become, for the impossible chasm between the two. Tears flowed over her carefully applied makeup, creating rivers of black mascara down her cheeks. She looked exactly how she felt, an unmasked imposter, a country girl who had dared to believe she could belong to this world of crystal and conventions. "Marlowe!" Dashiell's voice was soft but firm. She hadn't heard him approach. He stood there, his silhouette cut out by the light coming from the estate's windows, his impeccable suit contrasting with her collapsed posture. "I can't do this," she said in a broken voice. "Dashiell, I can't. I don't know which fork to use, I don't know the right people, I don't understand the codes. I'm just me. And that's not enough here." Instead of responding immediately, Dashiell sat beside her on the cold ground, ruining his $10,000 Brioni suit without the slightest hesitation. He remained silent for a moment, looking at the stars beginning to appear in the night sky. "You see this suit?" he finally asked, touching the luxurious fabric. "It comes from Italy, custom-made by the best tailor in Rome. Do you know how much it costs?" Marlowe shook her head. "More than my mother earned in 6 months of work as a laundress," he said, his voice tinged with an emotion she'd never heard from him. "I was born in Brooklyn, Marlowe, in a 2-room apartment where my mother washed rich people's clothes to feed my brother and me. I ate stale bread dipped in milk. I had 1 pair of shoes that had to last the entire school year." He turned to her, taking her face in his hands. "I learned those stupid rules about forks and tablecloths because I was forced to survive in this world. But you know what? Every day I wear a mask. Every conversation is a performance. And I'm so tired, Marlowe, so tired of pretending." He wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "When I first saw you, you were laughing with an old man who'd bought one of your small paintings. You didn't know he was a millionaire. You didn't know he owned half of the Upper East Side. You treated him with the same authentic kindness you would have shown anyone. And I thought that was the most beautiful thing I'd seen in 20 years. But I'm not like them," Marlowe insisted. "I'll never be." "No," Dashiell interrupted, with a firmness that silenced her. "You'll never be like them. And that's exactly why I choose you. Those people in there have everything, money, status, the right forks, but you know what they don't have? They don't have the ability to truly feel. They've built so many walls to protect themselves that they've forgotten how to live authentically." He took her paint-stained hands, she'd worked in her studio all morning, and kissed each finger. "I choose you not despite who you are, but exactly because of it. Don't let them steal that from you. Never let them make you believe you have to become like them to be worthy of love." Marlowe looked at him, this man who had climbed mountains of success to find himself alone at the summit, and realized they might be more similar than she'd thought. Both struggled against the feeling of not being enough, of wearing masks, of searching for a place where they could simply be themselves. "What if I can't learn?" she murmured. "What if I keep ruining everything?" Dashiell smiled, that rare smile that transformed his face. "Then you'll keep ruining everything, and I'll be here, sitting beside you on cold floors, ruining expensive suits, because that's true love. It's not perfection. It's the choice to stay." They remained like that for a long time, sitting under the century-old orange tree, 2 wounded souls holding each other against the cold and the judgments. And when they finally went back inside, hand in hand, the guests were gone. The estate was silent, waiting to be transformed into a home that would resemble them. The following weeks were a whirlwind of painful adjustments. Marlowe sincerely tried to learn the codes of this new world. She hired an etiquette teacher, studied art history from the great auction houses, attended afternoon teas with the wives of Dashiell's associates. But every effort seemed to dig the chasm between who she really was and who she was expected to become. It was during a visit to her hometown, 2 months after the wedding, that everything changed. Her mother, June, still lived in the same small house with blue shutters where Marlowe had grown up. The familiar smell of pine and cinnamon enveloped her as soon as she crossed the threshold, and for the first time in weeks, she felt her shoulders relax. "You look exhausted, honey," June observed, preparing coffee in the tiny kitchen, her hands wrinkled from years of manual labor, performing the familiar gestures with grace. Marlowe collapsed onto the wobbly wooden chair that had always been her place at the table. "I don't know if I can do this, Mom. Every day I feel like an actress playing a role she doesn't understand. I smile, I nod, I wear the right dresses, but it's not me. It will never be me." June poured the coffee, thick and strong as only Montanans know how to make it, and sat across from her daughter. "Do you remember Mrs. Henderson, our neighbor who was a piano teacher?" Marlowe furrowed her brow, confused by the change of subject. "Of course, she gave us free lessons when we couldn't pay." "What you didn't know," June continued, "is that she came from a very wealthy family in New York. She'd left everything to marry a simple farmer from our town because she loved him. The first years were terrible. She didn't know how to light a fire in the fireplace, how to make bread, how to tend chickens. The village women mocked her behind her back." "I didn't know," Marlowe murmured. "But she didn't try to become like them," June said, her eyes shining with wisdom acquired over the years. "She remained herself, a woman who loved music, who read poetry, who saw beauty in simple things. And slowly the village changed around her. She brought something new, something precious. When she died, the whole village mourned, not the snobbish New Yorker they'd judged at first, but the authentic woman she'd never stopped being." June took her daughter's hand. "You can't become someone else to please that world, Marlowe. But you can bring who you are into that world and transform it. Do you understand the difference?" Those words resonated in her like a church bell, clear and true. That night, in her childhood bedroom, where her old paintings still hung on the walls, Marlowe made a decision that would change everything. She wouldn't play by their rules anymore. Instead, she would create her own path. Back at the estate, she found Dashiell in his study, bent over financial documents. "I need to talk to you," she said with new determination in her voice. He looked up, surprised by her tone. "Of course. What's going on?" "I want to create a project," Marlowe began, her words rushing now that she'd decided to release them. "An art workshop for underprivileged children in Brooklyn. I want to teach them painting, give them the opportunity to express themselves through art like I was able to." She approached his desk, her eyes shining with a passion he hadn't seen in weeks. "I know you'll probably fund the project if I ask you, but I don't want your money, not like that. I want to do it right, create a foundation, seek other sponsors, involve the community. I want to build something that's mine." Dashiell looked at her for a long time, and she saw something transform in his expression. Surprise, then understanding, then respect. "You know what?" he said, standing up and coming around his desk toward her. "That's exactly what I told you I wanted, to transform this estate into something alive. But it wasn't the estate that needed transformation. It was us." He pulled her into his arms. "Do it. Create your project. I'll support you in every way possible, but it will be your work, your vision. And Brooklyn." He smiled with nostalgia. "It's the perfect place to start." That night, Marlowe drew the first sketches of what would become Hands That Create, an art center for children that would not only change her life but also transform how the world perceived her. Brooklyn in winter was a patchwork of cultures, smells, and sounds that reminded Marlowe why she'd fallen in love with painting in the first place. Here, the weathered facades told stories, the time-worn faces carried the wisdom of truly lived lives, and the music escaping from open windows was authentic, vibrant, real. She found the perfect space, an old bookbindery on the ground floor of a building on Atlantic Avenue, with large windows facing the street, and enough room to accommodate 15 children at a time. The owner, Mr. Hassan, a man of Egyptian origin with grey temples and a warm smile, was skeptical at first. "Why would a lady from the Hamptons want to set up shop here?" he asked frankly, his arms crossed over his broad chest. "Is this for your conscience? A little charity project to make yourself feel better?" The question was direct, almost brutal, but Marlowe appreciated his honesty. "You're right to be suspicious," she responded, holding his gaze. "If I were in your shoes, I'd think the same thing. But this isn't charity, it's my survival." She explained herself, telling him about her own journey, her feeling of not belonging to the world she now lived in, her need to create something authentic. "I'm not coming here to save anyone," she said finally. "I'm coming here to save myself." Something changed in Mr. Hassan's gaze. He nodded slowly. "All right, but I want to be involved. My grandson is 8 years old, and he draws on every wall in the apartment. His mother's going crazy. If you're serious, he'll be your first student." Over the following weeks, Marlowe transformed the old bindery with her own hands. Dashiell came to help on weekends, removing his suit to put on old jeans and repaint the walls in luminous white. Piper, the rebellious niece, became an unexpected ally, bringing her music and adolescent energy to attract other young people. The first day of opening, 12 children showed up, some brought by parents hoping for a few hours of respite, others who came out of curiosity. Marlowe looked at them, these faces of all colors and origins, and felt something loosen in her chest. "Hello," she began, her voice trembling slightly with nervousness and excitement. "My name is Marlowe. I'm not a teacher. I'm not a famous artist. I'm just someone who believes that everyone has stories to tell, and sometimes the best stories can't be told with words. They have to be painted." A boy in the back, no more than 10 years old, raised his hand. "Is it true you're married to a millionaire?" The other children giggled. Marlowe smiled. "Yes, it's true, and you know what? That hasn't changed the fact that I can't sleep if I don't have paint under my fingernails. That hasn't changed the fact that the thing that makes me happiest in the world is mixing Prussian blue with titanium white to get exactly the right shade of winter sky." She pulled out canvases, brushes, paints. "Today, we're not going to learn rules. We're not going to copy anything. Today, you're just going to paint what you feel." The hours that followed were magical. The children created with a freedom that brought tears to Marlowe's eyes. A Syrian boy painted his home in Aleppo before the war. A Senegalese girl created a portrait of her grandmother, with colors so vibrant they seemed to dance on the canvas. Mr. Hassan's grandson, Ibrahim, painted a dragon eating all the math homework. When Dashiell came to pick her up that evening, he found her sitting amid still wet canvases, paint in her hair, on her face, on her clothes. She was smiling a smile he'd never seen on her. Luminous, free, authentic. "How was it?" he asked. "It was perfect," she replied simply. But this was only the beginning. The following weeks brought challenges she hadn't anticipated. Some parents mistrusted her motivations. Other children from the neighborhood didn't come because they had to work after school to help their families. Funding was more complicated to obtain than she'd thought. Even with Dashiell's name, sponsors wanted to see measurable results, statistics, proof of impact. It was Mrs. Cohen, a retired teacher from the neighborhood, who became her most valuable ally. "You're doing good work," she told her one afternoon, watching the children paint. "But if you really want to make a difference, you need to think bigger. An exhibition, show the world what these children are creating." The idea slowly germinated in Marlowe's mind. What if she organized an exhibition of the children's work? Not in some obscure gallery, but somewhere that would force people to pay attention. She mentioned it to Dashiell that evening. "MoMA PS1, she said, almost laughing at the audacity of her own suggestion. "I know it's crazy, but imagine, these children's paintings displayed in one of the most prestigious contemporary art centers in New York." Dashiell didn't laugh. Instead, he picked up his phone. "I have some contacts," he said simply. 2 months later, thanks to a mix of connections, persistence, and the undeniable quality of the children's work, Hands That Create secured an exhibition space at MoMA PS1. But this impending success also brought its share of complications. The announcement of the exhibition made waves in New York high society and the media. Suddenly, Marlowe was no longer just the provincial wife of the millionaire. She was becoming someone with her own identity, her own project, her own voice. Theodora, Dashiell's sister, reacted as Marlowe had feared. She showed up at the estate one Tuesday afternoon without warning, her face a mask of contained rage. "You're making our family a laughingstock," she attacked as soon as Marlowe opened the door. "An art exhibition with children from Brooklyn at MoMA PS1, using the Ashford name for this poorly disguised charity project?" Marlowe felt anger rising in her, but she kept her composure. "This isn't charity. It's real art created by talented children who deserve to be seen." "It's an insult," Theodora spat. "Our family has supported artistic institutions for generations. Real artists, real works, not children's scribbles who... That's enough. Dashiell's voice was cold as steel. He stood in the entrance, having heard every word. Theodora, I think it's time for you to leave. Dashiell, you can't be serious, she protested. She's making you look like a fool. All of the Upper East Side is talking about... I don't care what the Upper East Side thinks, Dashiell interrupted, moving to stand beside Marlowe. This woman is doing more to honor the Ashford name with her authenticity than all our formal dinners and charity galas combined. If you can't see that, then the problem isn't her. It's you. Theodora's face paled. You'll regret this, she said in a voice trembling with rage. When this farce fails, when she turns out to be exactly what I think she is, an opportunist who married for money, you'll remember that I warned you. She left with a clicking of heels on marble. The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with consequences. I'm sorry, Marlowe murmured. I didn't want to cause a rift in your family. Dashiell turned to her, taking her face in his hands. You didn't cause any rift. That crack has existed for years. My sister has built her life around appearances, status, other people's opinions. She'll never understand what we have. But the damage was done. In the days that followed, Theodora launched a subtle but effective campaign to undermine the exhibition before it even took place. She contacted art critics she knew, planting doubts about Marlowe's motivations. She circulated rumors that the exhibition was just a publicity stunt, a desperate attempt by an inadequate woman to prove her worth. The media began covering the story, but not always positively. Millionaire's wife plays artist, one tabloid headlined. Vanity project or real art? A cultural magazine asked. Marlowe tried to stay focused on the work, on the children, on the reason she'd started this project, but every article, every comment, every pitying look eroded her confidence. It was Piper who finally broke her silence. You know what pisses me off the most? The teenager said one afternoon while they prepared canvases for the exhibition. They never criticize you for your actual work. They criticize you for who you married, where you come from, how you talk, as if any of that has anything to do with these kids' art. She was right, of course, and that realization gave Marlowe new determination. She couldn't control what others thought or said, but she could control the quality of her work, the authenticity of her intention, the truth of her commitment. The night of the opening arrived like a freight train. MoMA PS1 was illuminated, transformed. The children's paintings hanging on the white walls created a kaleidoscope of emotions and colors. Marlowe had insisted that every child be present with their family, dressed not in formal attire, but in what they normally wore, because authenticity was the central message of the exhibition. Little Ibrahim stood in front of his painting of the dragon eating homework, proudly explaining to an astonished art critic why math was mean dragon's favorite food. The Senegalese girl, Amara, showed her grandmother portrait to a journalist, telling how much she missed her since she'd stayed in Africa. The atmosphere was electric, different from all the stiff openings Marlowe had attended. It was alive, noisy, real. That's when she noticed the critics, the ones Theodora had contacted walking through the space. Their expressions were unreadable. Marlowe felt her stomach knot. One of them, Peter Morrison, the most feared critic in New York, stopped in front of a particular painting, the Syrian boys showing his home in Aleppo. He stayed there for 10 minutes, simply looking, his face impassive. When he finally turned, he sought out Marlowe with his gaze. Their eyes met across the crowd. He approached slowly. Mrs. Ashford, he began, his voice grave and measured. Marlowe mentally prepared herself for the devastating critique that would follow. I came tonight expecting to see yet another vanity project, he said, a rich woman playing philanthropist to improve her image. He paused, his gaze returning to the paintings on the walls. But what I've seen here tonight is something we've lost in the contemporary art world. Brutal honesty, unfiltered emotion. These children haven't learned to paint what critics want to see. They've learned to paint what they feel. He turned back to her. You've given them something priceless, not technique. That will come with time. You've given them permission to be authentic, and in that process you've created something truly remarkable. Marlowe felt tears rising. Thank you, she murmured, her voice choked with emotion. When the last guests left, well after midnight, Dashiell found Marlowe sitting alone in the empty gallery, looking at the paintings. He sat beside her without saying a word. I did it, she said finally, almost disbelieving. Not because of your name or your money, I really did it. Dashiell kissed her forehead. You were always capable of this. You just needed to believe it yourself. But success, as Marlowe would soon discover, brought its own complications. And the secrets of Dashiell's past, buried so carefully for so long, were about to resurface in a devastating way. The success of the exhibition at MoMA PS1 transformed public perception of Marlowe almost overnight. Glowing articles replaced sarcastic critiques. Invitations flooded in, not just for her as Dashiell's wife, but for her as the creator of the Hands That Create project. But it was precisely this moment of triumph that Veronica, Dashiell's ex-wife, chose to reappear. It happened during a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, exactly 1 year after their wedding. Marlowe wore an emerald dress that brought out her eyes, and for the first time in a long while, she felt truly at ease. She was discussing potential sponsors for the program's expansion when she saw her. Veronica was the embodiment of glacial elegance, platinum blonde hair styled in a perfect chignon, white evening gown that seemed to have been sculpted onto her body, and those ice-blue eyes that never blinked. She walked across the hall directly toward Dashiell, who was talking with investors. "Dashiell," she said, her voice carrying in the sudden silence that had fallen around them. "It's been a long time." Marlowe saw her husband's face drain of color. "Veronica, what are you doing here?" "Oh, I've been on the board of directors of this museum for 3 years," she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Isn't that a happy coincidence?" Marlowe approached, her instinct pushing her to position herself beside Dashiell. "I'm Marlowe," she said, extending her hand in a way she hoped was polite but firm. Veronica looked at the extended hand as if it were something unpleasant, then finally shook it briefly. "Of course, the artist. Or should I say the new wife?" "Veronica," Dashiell began, his voice a warning. But she ignored him completely, turning to the assembly of important people who had gathered, drawn by the unfolding drama. "It's wonderful to see Dashiell so happy," she said, her tone suggesting exactly the opposite. "He deserves a second chance after everything that happened." "We should go," Dashiell said, firmly taking Marlowe's arm. "Oh, but I just wanted to share my congratulations," Veronica continued, her voice getting louder, more performative. "After all, it's not every day that a man gets a second chance at fatherhood. I hope this time will be different." The silence was deafening. Marlowe felt Dashiell stiffen beside her. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice surprisingly calm despite the chaos beginning to boil in her chest. Veronica smiled, and it was the smile of a predator having spotted its prey. "He didn't tell you that he has a son? That he chose his empire building over his own family? That our son Wesley was 5 years old when the judge took away his custody because he was always on business trips, always absent, always prioritizing money over everything else?" Each word was a stab wound. Marlowe turned to Dashiell, seeking denial in his eyes. But what she saw destroyed her. Guilt, shame, and worst of all, confirmation. "Is it true?" she whispered. "Marlowe, I can explain," Dashiell began, but his voice was broken. "Oh, and the best part," Veronica continued, clearly savoring every moment, "is that Wesley, who's now 23, has refused to speak to his father for 7 years. The last time Dashiell tried to contact him, our son changed his phone number and moved without leaving an address. The public humiliation was total. Marlowe felt the stares of all the guests on her. Pity, morbid curiosity, judgment. Photographers' flashes began to crackle. This moment would be immortalized in every tabloid by tomorrow morning. "Excuse me," she said, her voice oddly flat. She turned and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking on the marble floor like a metronome, counting the beats of her broken heart. "Marlowe, wait!" Dashiell followed her, catching her arm in the empty entrance hall. She turned sharply, and he saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Betrayal. "Son," she said, her voice trembling with anger and pain. "You have a son you never told me about. Not once. Not during our conversations about the children we wanted to have together. Not when I told you my dreams of family." "I wanted to tell you," he began, but the words rang hollow even to his own ears. "When?" she demanded, tears now flowing down her cheeks. "After our first child? After our 10th anniversary? When, Dashiell?" He had no answer. The truth was that he'd locked that part of his life in a hermetically sealed box, too painful to open, too shameful to discuss. "I lost my relationship with Wesley because of my own selfish choices," he said finally, his voice filled with a pain she'd never heard. "I was young, stupid, obsessed with building something that would prove my worth, and when I realized what I'd sacrificed, it was too late. He hated me. He still hates me." "And you thought what?" Marlowe asked, her voice rising. "That you could just start over with me? Create a new family and pretend the first one never existed?" "No, it's not like that." "Then what is it like?" She angrily wiped her tears. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you married me as some kind of redemption. A naive country girl who'd be too stupid or too dazzled by your wealth to ask hard questions." "You know that's not true," Dashiell said, trying to take her hands, but she pulled back. "I don't know anything anymore," Marlowe replied. "I thought I knew you. I thought we shared everything. But you kept something so huge, so fundamental as the existence of your own child secret. How am I supposed to trust you now?" A driver waited discreetly near the car. Marlowe got in without another word to Dashiell. "Take me to my mother's," she told the driver. "In Montana." "Marlowe, please," Dashiell pleaded through the window. But she turned her face away, refusing to look at him. The car started, taking her away from the man she thought she knew, away from the fairy tale that had proven to be built on foundations of secrets and omissions. Her mother's house in Whitefish, Montana was exactly as she remembered. Small, modest, filled with the scent of dried wildflowers and fresh bread. June welcomed her daughter without asking questions, immediately seeing in her red eyes and hunched shoulders everything she needed to know. Marlowe spent the first days in a kind of fog. She slept until noon, unable to find a reason to get up. Her phone rang constantly. Dashiell, Piper, even Mrs. Cohen from the Brooklyn Project. But she didn't answer any calls. The tabloids had feasted on the scandal. Millionaire's dark secret revealed. Deceived wife flees New York. Hidden son destroys fairy tale marriage. Photos of her leaving the gala, her face ravaged by pain, were everywhere. It was the 5th day that June knocked firmly on the bedroom door. "That's enough," she said without preamble. "Get up. We're going to paint." "Mom, I can't." "You can," June interrupted with the firmness of someone who had raised 4 children alone after her husband's illness. "Pain doesn't stop because you stay in bed. It stops when you decide to do something with it." They set up easels in the small garden behind the house, where the wildflowers were just beginning to bud for the coming spring. Marlowe picked up a brush for the first time since the scandal, and when she began to paint, something in her broke and was released at the same time. The colors that emerged were dark, Payne's gray, deep Prussian blue, burnt umber. Nothing like her usual Montana hues. But in those shadows there was also a truth she'd never explored before, the complexity of human emotions, the beauty that exists even in pain. "What do you feel?" June asked, after several hours of silence. Marlowe stopped, her brush suspended in the air. "I feel betrayed, but not just by him. I feel betrayed by myself, too. How could I be so naive? How could I think that a man with so much past wouldn't have secrets?" June cleaned her own brushes. She'd never been an artist, but she stayed beside her daughter, creating abstract scribbles that made no sense, but showed her support. "You weren't naive. You were trusting. There's a difference. And yes, he made a terrible mistake not telling you, but the question now isn't whether he made a mistake. The question is whether you can forgive him." "I don't know if I can," Marlowe admitted. "Every time I think about him, I wonder what else he hasn't told me. How many other secrets are waiting to emerge and destroy what we have left?" That evening, she did something she'd avoided for days. She read Dashiell's messages. There were dozens, evolving from desperation to detailed explanations, then finally to something different. The last message, sent the previous night, was simple. "I understand if you never want to talk to me again, but there are things I need to say, not to justify myself, but because you deserve to know the whole truth. I've written it all. My marriage to Veronica, Wesley's birth, the choices I made, the guilt I carry. I put everything in a letter. It's at your mother's. Read it when you're ready. Or never read it, it's your choice. I'll always love you even if you choose to leave. D." Marlowe went downstairs and found the envelope on the kitchen table. It was thick, filled with pages and pages of handwriting. She picked it up, felt its weight in her hands, and realized this letter represented a choice. Reading would mean opening herself again to the possibility of pain. Not reading would mean definitively closing the door on their relationship. She went up to her room, sat on the bed and began to read. The letter was heartbreaking in its brutal honesty. Dashiell recounted everything: how he'd married Veronica at 23 in a marriage arranged by their families, how the marriage had been cold from the start, how Wesley was born more from obligation than love. He described his early years building his business, working 18 hours a day, traveling constantly, missing his son's first words, first steps, birthdays. "I thought I was building a future for him," Dashiell wrote, "but what I was really building was an excuse not to face the fact that I didn't know how to be a father. My own father had abandoned me as a child, and I had no model of what it really meant to be present for a child." He described the devastating divorce, the custody battle he lost, the look of hatred in Wesley's eyes during their last meeting when the boy was 16. "He told me he hated me, that he would have preferred not having a father rather than having the one I'd been, and he was right. But the most shattering part came near the end. When I met you, Marlo, you represented everything I'd lost along the way. The ability to see beauty in simple things, authenticity, joy. I knew I should tell you about Wesley. Every day I told myself I would do it the next day, but the truth is, I was so afraid. Afraid you'd see me as the failed father I am. Afraid you'd realize I don't deserve a second chance. Afraid of losing the only real and beautiful thing I've had in my life. My silence wasn't calculated deception, it was pure cowardice, and I regret it more than I can express. You deserve better. You deserve someone brave enough to show you all their scars, not just the presentable ones. I'm not asking you to forgive. I'm only asking you to understand that you changed my life in a way I no longer thought possible. And even if our story ends here, I'll be eternally grateful for the time we had." Marlo finished the letter with tears flowing down her cheeks, but they were different tears now. Not just pain, but also understanding. Dashiell wasn't the perfect hero of her fairy tale. He was a deeply flawed man, carrying regrets that ate at him, clumsily trying to build something new on the ruins of his past. The question was, could she love this imperfect man? Could she build a life with someone whose secrets had already caused so much pain? She didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time since the scandal, she felt something different from anger and betrayal. She felt compassion, and maybe, just maybe, the first seeds of forgiveness. The next morning, Marlo woke with a clarity she hadn't felt in days. She went downstairs to find her mother preparing coffee, as always, in the kitchen bathed in the soft Montana morning light. "I'm going to stay a few more days," Marlo announced. "I need time to think clearly." June nodded, pouring the thick coffee into traditional bowls. "Take all the time you need, but remember, thinking and ruminating are two different things." The following days established a soothing routine. Marlo painted in the morning, walked in the wildflower meadows in the afternoon, and in the evening sat with her mother on the small porch, watching the sun set over the rolling hills. It was the fourth day that she noticed the white rose. It was leaning against the front door, perfect and solitary, without a card or message. Marlo picked it up, smelling its delicate fragrance, and something tightened in her chest. The next day, another rose, then another the day after. Always at dawn, always a single white rose, always without words. "Is it him?" June asked on the fifth day, as they looked at the new rose. "I think so," Marlo replied softly. "He doesn't come knocking on the door, he doesn't pressure. He just waits," June observed. "That's something." The roses continued. 7, 8, 9, each one a silent promise, a patient reminder of the love that waited without demanding an answer. On the 14th day with the rose, there was a key and an address scribbled on a piece of paper. Marlo recognized Dashiell's handwriting. The address was local, somewhere in the village. "I think you should go," June said when Marlo showed her. The address led to a small house at the end of the main street, the white house with blue shutters where Marlo had grown up before her family moved to her mother's current house. The house that had been put up for sale because of her father's medical debts, the one whose loss had broken her heart. Marlo used the key with trembling hands. Inside, everything was exactly as in her childhood memories. The same terracotta tile floors, the same ceiling beams, even the same growth marks on the doorframe where her father had measured her height every birthday. On the kitchen table there was a letter. "Marlowe, this house now belongs to your family. The debts are paid. The deed is in your mother's name. This isn't a gift to bring you back or to buy your forgiveness. It's because whatever happens to us, you taught me something priceless, that the most precious things in life aren't those we buy, but those we preserve. The memories you have in this house, the moments with your father before he got sick, the innocence of your childhood. These things are irreplaceable. I can't fix my own mistakes with Wesley, but I can at least protect someone else's precious memories. No expectations, no conditions, just love." Dashiell. Marlowe sat on the old living room couch, the letter trembling in her hands. Tears flowed down her cheeks, but this time they were tears of something different. Gratitude, understanding, perhaps even the beginning of forgiveness. She thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the scandal, the pain, but she also thought about the man who sat beside her on cold floors when she felt inadequate. The man who had created a painting studio just for her. The man who had defended her against his own family. The man who, despite all his flaws and mistakes, had truly seen and loved her for who she was. Nobody is perfect. Everyone carries scars, regrets, parts of their past they'd like to rewrite. The question wasn't whether Dashiell had made mistakes. The question was whether they could learn together, grow together, build something new on the ruins of their combined imperfections. That night Marlowe did something she hadn't done in 2 weeks. She called Dashiell. He answered on the first ring. "Marlowe." His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Thank you," she said simply. "For the house, for the roses, for waiting." "I'd wait a lifetime," he replied, and she could hear the truth in his voice. "I'm not ready to come back," she said gently. "Not yet. I need more time." "I understand," Dashiell said. "Take all the time you need. But Dashiell, yes? I want you to start therapy to work on your relationship with Wesley. Even if you think it's too late, even if you think he'll never forgive you, you have to try. For you, for us." There was a long silence. Then, "Okay, I will. And I want us to start couples therapy too, because if we try again, I want it to be with a stronger foundation, with complete honesty, no matter how hard it is. Anything you want," he promised. "Anything? Then give me 2 more weeks and we'll see." When she hung up, Marlowe felt lighter than she had in days. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but for the first time, she could see a possible path toward the future. Marlowe spent 2 more weeks in Whitefish, using that time not to flee but to truly reflect on what she wanted. She painted canvases that explored the complexity of human emotions, neither completely dark nor completely light, but something in between that more faithfully reflected the truth of life. Dashiell, true to his word, started therapy. He called her every evening, not to pressure her to return, but to share what he was learning about himself. Those conversations were different from all they'd had before, deeper, more vulnerable, more honest. "My therapist asked me today why I thought I deserved a second chance with you, when I'd never really fought for my first chance with Wesley," Dashiell confessed one night. "And what did you answer?" Marlowe asked, sitting on her mother's porch, watching the stars. "I didn't have a good answer," he admitted, "but he made me realize something. I was running from Wesley because looking at him reminded me of all my failures. With you, I had the illusion of a fresh start. But you can't really start over without making peace with your past." "So what will you do?" Marlowe asked gently. "I'm going to write to Wesley, not to demand that he forgive me, just to tell him the truth, about my mistakes, my regrets, about the man I was and the man I'm trying to become." The following weeks, Dashiell wrote letter after letter to his son. He didn't even know if Wesley received or read them. But the very process of writing was cathartic, a way to finally face the demons he'd avoided for so long. Meanwhile, Marlowe was also doing work on herself. She realized that her own insecurity, her constant feeling of not being enough, had influenced her reaction to Dashiell's secret. A part of her had always been waiting for him to reject her, to realize she wasn't up to par. The secret about Wesley had confirmed that deep fear. "But that's not what happened," her mother pointed out during a late-night conversation. "He didn't reject you. He hid something from you out of shame, not lack of love." "I know," Marlowe said. "That's what's hardest. I have to choose to trust him, even after the betrayal. And that's terrifying. The day finally came when Marlowe felt she was ready. She called Dashiell. "I'm coming home," she said simply. He came to get her himself, driving for 6 hours without stopping. When he arrived in front of June's house, Marlowe came out, her single suitcase in hand. They looked at each other for a long moment. Two people who had been through hell and emerged changed. "You look different," Marlowe observed. "I am different," Dashiell replied. "Therapy is difficult, but necessary. I see so many things I didn't want to see before." The drive back to New York was filled with comfortable silences and deep conversations. They talked about everything, her fears, his regrets, how they wanted their marriage to be if they chose to continue. "I want us to start couples therapy," Marlowe said. "From next week." "Already booked," Dashiell replied. "Wednesday at 3. Back at the estate everything seemed different. Not physically, the same stone walls, the same elegant furniture, but the atmosphere had changed. Piper welcomed her with tears of joy, jumping into her arms. "I missed you so much. The estate was so empty without you." That night Dashiell and Marlowe sat in the drawing room, a fire crackling in the fireplace. "There's something I need to show you," Dashiell said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. It was a letter. From Wesley. "He responded?" Marlowe asked, incredulous. Dashiell nodded, tears shining in his eyes. "Not to all my letters, but to the last one. The one where I told him about you, about how you made me realize what I'd lost with him." Marlowe read the letter, short but powerful. "Dad, I'm not ready to see you. I don't know if I ever will be. But your letters, they're different. For the first time, you're not trying to apologize or justify, you're simply admitting the truth. I'm not forgetting everything that happened, but maybe someday we can talk. Not now, but maybe someday." "Wesley." "It's a start," Marlowe murmured, taking Dashiell's hand. "It's more than I could have hoped for," he replied, his voice choked with emotion. The following months were a period of reconstruction. Couples therapy wasn't easy. It forced Dashiell and Marlowe to face uncomfortable truths about themselves and their relationship. But with each difficult session, they built something more solid than what they'd had before. The Hands That Create project continued to thrive. Marlowe opened 2 new centers, one in the Bronx and one in Queens. The children from Brooklyn continued to create extraordinary works, and some were even beginning to win national competitions. One spring morning, 3 months after her return, Marlowe woke up with nausea. She knew that feeling instinctively even before taking the test. She was pregnant. When she told Dashiell, his face went through a range of emotions, joy, then immediately terror. "What if I do everything wrong again?" he murmured, his old fears resurfacing. Marlowe took his face in her hands. "You won't be perfect. I won't be perfect. We'll make mistakes, but this time you won't be alone. This time we'll do it together. And this time you've done the necessary work to be truly present." Dashiell kissed her with an intensity that contained all his gratitude, his fear, his love, and his hope. The news of the pregnancy transformed something in the estate. Piper, now 16, immediately became hyperprotective, insisting that Marlowe not lift anything heavy and bringing her crackers when the morning sickness was particularly bad. Even Theodora made a clumsy attempt at reconciliation, showing up one afternoon with a gift for the coming baby, an antique teddy bear that had belonged to Dashiell as a child. "I haven't been fair to you," she said, the words seeming difficult to get out. "You've brought something to this family that we'd lost a long time ago, something real." It wasn't a complete apology, and their relationship would always remain complicated. But it was a start. The biggest surprise came 6 months into the pregnancy. Dashiell received another letter from Wesley, this time with a proposal. "If you really want to try, maybe we could meet, just for coffee, no expectations." The meeting was arranged at a neutral cafe in Brooklyn. Dashiell was so nervous he changed shirts 3 times. Marlowe kissed him before he left. "Just be yourself, the man you've become, not the man you were." The meeting lasted 2 hours. When Dashiell returned, his eyes were red, but there was a slight smile on his lips. It wasn't easy, he's angry, he has every reason to be, but he agreed to see each other again in a few weeks. And he wants to meet you. He says anyone who can make me face my demons must be someone special. Marlowe met Wesley 3 weeks later. He had his father's eyes, but the smile of someone who had learned to protect himself too young. They talked about art. Wesley was studying architecture. and slowly, gently, a connection began to form. "I'm not forgiving everything," Wesley said at one point, his frankness painfully reminiscent of Dashiell's. "And I don't know if our relationship will ever become what it should have been, but I'm willing to try, to see where it leads." It was all they could hope for. The rest would come with time, effort, and the willingness of everyone to grow together. The opening of Marlowe's new exhibition at MoMA PS1 coincided with her 8th month of pregnancy. This time it wasn't an exhibition of the children's works, but her own work, a series of paintings she'd created during the tumultuous year just past. The canvases told a story without words: transformation, pain, betrayal, forgiveness, rediscovered love. They were technically brilliant, but above all emotionally devastating in their raw honesty. The title of the exhibition, Paint-Stained Hands, a reference to Marlowe's hands always colored with paint, but also a metaphor for human imperfection, for the fact that we all carry the marks of our mistakes and experiences. The centerpiece was a large triptych. The first panel showed a young woman in a wedding dress, lost in a crystal estate. The second showed the same woman, broken, sitting in darkness. The third showed two hands, one young and stained with paint, the other older with calluses, intertwined, holding broken pieces together and transforming them into something new. The critical response was extraordinary. Peter Morrison, the same critic who had validated her during the children's exhibition, wrote, "Marlowe Ashford is no longer simply a philanthropist who paints. She's an artist who has something important to say about the human condition. This exhibition is a masterclass in vulnerability transformed into strength." The night of the opening, MoMA PS1 was packed. Everyone was there: Dashiell's associates, the families of children from Brooklyn, Piper and her friends, even Theodora, who looked at the paintings with something resembling respect, and Wesley. He came with his girlfriend, a young architect named Claire. He spent time in front of each painting, studying the brushstrokes, the color choices. When he arrived at the central triptych, he remained silent for a long time. Dashiell stood at a distance, not daring to approach, respecting his son's space. Finally, Wesley turned and sought out his father with his gaze. He approached slowly. "It's powerful," he said simply. "She really saw you, both versions of you." Dashiell nodded, his throat too tight to speak. "I don't know if I can see you like that yet," Wesley continued, his voice trembling slightly. "But I want to try. I want to try to know the man you are now. Not just remember the man you were." It was the moment Dashiell had been waiting for 7 years. Not complete forgiveness, that would be a lifelong journey, but the opening to possibility, the acceptance that people can change. The two men looked at each other, then slowly, awkwardly embraced. It wasn't the hug of a father and son reunited in a tearjerker movie. It was something more honest. Two strangers who shared blood and pain, taking the first difficult step toward healing. Marlowe, watching the scene, felt tears flowing down her cheeks. Piper came to stand beside her, taking her hand. "You did this," the teenager murmured. "You helped them find each other again." Marlowe shook her head. "No, they did it themselves. I just believed in them hard enough that they could start believing in themselves." Later that evening, as the crowd began to disperse, Marlowe felt strangely tired. She sat on a bench in the corner of the gallery, one hand on her round belly. "Are you okay?" Dashiell asked, sitting beside her. "Just tired," she replied. "It was a lot, but good a lot." Dashiell took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "You know what I realized today?" "What?" "That everything, the estate, the money, the empire I built, none of it ever meant anything until now. This hand," he raised their intertwined hands, "stained with paint, holding mine. That's the only real thing I've ever had." Marlowe leaned her head on his shoulder. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" "Miles," Dashiell agreed. "And there are many more to go. But now I know we can travel them together." 6 weeks after the exhibition, on a gentle late spring morning, Marlowe gave birth to a baby girl with hazel eyes and chestnut hair. They named her June, in honor of the grandmother who had taught her daughter true wisdom, that true love isn't the absence of conflicts, but the choice to stay and grow despite them. The Hamptons estate had completely changed over the past year. The cold marble walls were now adorned with Marlowe's vibrant paintings and the works of children from her program. The smell of fresh paint mixed with that of homemade bread. The kitchen was now used daily, full of laughter and life. Piper had decided to study social work, inspired by her aunt's project. Wesley came to dinner once a month, always a bit awkward with Dashiell, but each visit slowly building a bridge over the chasm that had separated them for so long. One Saturday afternoon, 3 months after June's birth, the whole family gathered in the estate gardens for an informal celebration. Nothing formal, just a simple lunch with the people they loved. Marlowe's mother was there, radiant, holding her granddaughter with the tenderness of a woman who knew the preciousness of these moments. Mr. Hassan and his grandson Ibrahim had come from Brooklyn, bringing homemade Egyptian pastries. Mrs. Cohen was present with several of her former students. Even Theodora was there, though still a bit stiff but making visible efforts. Wesley stood apart, observing the scene with an architect's critical eye. Claire, his girlfriend, gently pushed him. "Go," she murmured. "This is your family too." He approached Dashiell, who was holding little June with the delicacy of someone who had lost the right to do so once and never took anything for granted again. "She's beautiful," Wesley said, looking at his half-sister. "She is," Dashiell agreed, then with hesitation. "Would you like to hold her?" Wesley hesitated, then nodded. Dashiell carefully transferred the baby to him. The young man looked at the small, sleeping face, and something loosened in his expression. "I never had this," he said softly. "You holding me like this, looking at me the way you look at her now." Dashiell felt tears stinging his eyes. "I know, and I can't get that lost time back. But Wesley, I want to try to build something new, not to replace what should have been, but to create something that might one day become precious in its own right." Wesley looked at his father, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in his adult life. "It'll take time," he said finally. "I have all the time in the world," Dashiell replied. Marlowe watched the scene from the veranda, Piper at her side. "They're going to make it," the teenager said with the absolute confidence of youth. "Maybe," Marlowe replied, "or maybe their relationship will always be a bit complicated, a bit broken. But what matters is that they're trying. It's in the trying that true love resides." Later that afternoon, as the sun was setting and guests began to leave, Dashiell found Marlowe in her third-floor studio. She'd set up a small crib for June in a corner, and the baby slept peacefully while her mother painted. "What are you working on?" Dashiell asked, coming over to see the canvas. It was a scene from the garden, all the people present today, rendered in Marlowe's distinctive style that captured not just faces, but the essence of people. Wesley holding June, Piper laughing with Ibrahim, June Sr. talking with Mrs. Cohen, even Theodora, sitting a bit apart, but present. "A new family," Marlowe said simply. "Not one bound by blood or traditions or social expectations, but one bound by choice, by imperfect but authentic love." Dashiell wrapped his arms around her from behind, placing his hands on her paint-stained ones. "You know what these hands represent to me," he murmured against her ear. "What?" she asked, leaning against him. "They represent everything I almost missed while building my empire of lifeless things. They represent the beauty of imperfection, the power of creation, the truth of who you are. These paint stains are more precious to me than all the diamonds I could buy." Marlowe turned in his arms, her face lifted to his. "You taught me something too," she said gently. "That truly loving someone doesn't mean loving them despite their flaws. It means loving them including their flaws, because those flaws are part of who they are." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other while their daughter slept peacefully and the golden late afternoon light filtered through the skylights. "You know what's funny?" Dashiell said after a moment of comfortable silence. "What?" 2 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be here, with a woman who defies all society's expectations, trying to rebuild a relationship with a son who hated me, living in an estate full of children's paintings and laughter instead of marble silence, I would have said they were crazy. Marlowe smiled. "And now? Now I realize it was my life before that was crazy. An empty existence dressed as success. This," he made a circular gesture encompassing the chaotic studio, the sleeping baby, the paint stains everywhere. "This is true wealth." The sun continued to descend, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple, the colors of Montana that Marlowe loved so much. In the garden below, they could hear Piper playing music on her phone, her mother's laughter, their friends' voices lingering. "I love you," Marlowe said simply, as she'd said 1,000 times before, but this time with a depth that came from truly knowing someone. Their lights and shadows, their successes and failures, their masks and their truth. "I love you," Dashiell replied. "Not because you're perfect, but because you're real. And you taught me to be real too." They kissed gently, a kiss that contained all the promises they'd made to each other, and all those they would continue to make. To choose honesty even when it's hard, to stay even when it's tempting to flee, to love even when love requires vulnerability. June stirred in her sleep, making a small sound. Marlowe approached the crib, looking at her daughter with the wonder that never truly dissipates for a new mother. Dashiell positioned himself beside her, and together they looked at this small miracle they had created. "She'll have a different life from the ones we had," Marlowe murmured. "How so?" Dashiell asked. "She'll grow up knowing that imperfection is okay, that mistakes are part of being human. That true love isn't a fairy tale without conflicts, but the courageous choice to stay, to grow, to forgive, to build something beautiful even from broken pieces." Dashiell kissed the top of her head. "Thanks to you." "Thanks to us," Marlowe corrected. "We did it together." And in that moment, in that studio, bathed in the golden evening light, with their daughter asleep and their improvised family still below in the garden, they understood something fundamental about the nature of love and happiness. It's not in perfect moments that we find true fulfillment. It's in imperfect moments, in difficult choices, in shared vulnerability, in the daily work of choosing love again and again, even when it's easier to leave. True love isn't an escape from a fairy tale or a perfect ending. It's two imperfect souls deciding that their combined imperfection creates something more beautiful than perfection could ever be. It's paint-stained hands holding calloused hands from hard work. It's the courage to show your scars and believe that someone will love them anyway. It's forgiveness, not because the mistake wasn't important, but because love is more so. And it's the choice, renewed every day, to build something true together. Not perfect, not without challenges, but authentic and deeply, beautifully human. The last rays of sun disappeared below the horizon. In the studio, Dashiell turned on the soft lights. Marlowe returned to her painting, adding the final touches to the portrait of their new chosen family. And life, in all its glorious imperfection, continued.